This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. I want to talk about an accusation that is being levied against President Donald Trump, and it revolves the tragic shooting of the synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, that was a horrible act of violence, and it was the largest anti-Semitic attack, I believe, in U.S. history. So it was a horrific event. Now, the mainstream media and many radical activist groups are trying to portray Donald Trump as someone who stirred this up, as someone whose language created the shooting and created a resurge in anti-Semitism. And I don't believe that the facts suggest that at all. Now, before I get into detail here, I want to talk a little bit about my background and my personal support for Israel and the Jews in Israel and the Jewish people. That is a matter of record that goes back 30 years in my ministry. It's in my books. It's in my talks. I was an active supporter of Israel for decades on my radio show, participating in special organizations where Jewish rabbis and Jewish leaders would stand together with Christian ministers. And this was an organization that involved my spiritual father, Dr. Jack Hayford. So I supported Israel. I continue to support Israel. I grew up in an all-Jewish neighborhood in Jackson Heights, Queens. All my friends were Jewish at a young age. And I saw firsthand anti-Semitism growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, as people from outside of the neighborhood would desecrate the exterior walls of a synagogue and put Nazi swastikas on it and other evil stuff. And coincidentally, the man and his wife and his family that lived on the apartment floor that we lived on was the president of the synagogue. And he was a wonderful man. And so I got to know the Jewish culture and the Jews personally on many, many levels, having basically all my friendships, all the birthday parties I went to. I was invited to participate in certain Jewish religious ceremonies. And all I can remember is fondness and appreciation for the Jewish people, because they were a kind, loving, and accepting people. In addition, I met personally many of the grandparents, and in some cases the parents of my Jewish friends who escaped the Holocaust, but many of them spent time in the concentration camps of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And they were scarred for life. You could see the terror in their eyes. It's something that's very difficult to describe. The terror that they experienced inside these Nazi concentration camps so marked their personalities that you could see the terror in their eyes years and decades later. And then there were many occasions where I asked to see the tattoos that the Nazis tattooed these Jewish people with, because when you went into a concentration camp, you had a tattoo. Today, if we had concentration camps on that level, they would probably give you a microchip implant or something. And I asked to see the tattoos because I wanted to see the historical evidence. I wanted to see for myself what had happened and try to understand even at a young age. And I wasn't intruding. I wasn't being intrusive into a very painful and delicate situation. It usually arose out of the conversation in which I would be talking to the concentration camp survivor with the tattoos, but their children, who would be often the mothers and fathers of my Jewish friends, and in some cases they were the parents of my Jewish friends. And I saw how devastating it was. And Jackson Heights, Queens, at that time, it's no longer the case, was primarily a Jewish neighborhood. In fact, I was raised as an atheist and a humanist. Now, I was also raised with, due to my grandmother, exposure to Catholicism. I had to attend religious instruction at the Catholic Church. And I'm very grateful to that because my atheist parents really weren't exposing me to the gospel and to Christianity. So I'm very thankful to the Catholics for teaching me the basics about Christianity, like, Jesus, Mary, the apostles. And, you may agree or disagree with Catholic doctrine. I'm of the Protestant persuasion, but I'm eternally grateful for the amount of truth that the Catholic Church deposited in me, because without their input, I would have had no knowledge, really, of the Bible, the New Testament. And then I was exposed to the Old Testament through my Jewish friends. Now, I remember one particular time, because Jackson Heights, Queens, this was a different era. This was in the late 50s, early 60s, or no, late 50s throughout the entire 60s and 70s. I remember being in junior high school, and these two guys, this is not a knock on Catholics, but I was in junior high school, and I was walking down the street, and these two jocks who were Catholics, because they said they were Catholics, and they were basketball players or something. And they came up to me, and I was not as tall as them, but I was tall, and I physically could take care of myself because that was part of my experience in Jackson Heights, Queens. So I knew how to fight and defend myself. But these guys were very tall and very intimidating. And, you would think if they were looking at me, I had blonde hair, blue eyes, and light skin. So it would have been fairly obvious that I wasn't Jewish to them. But I guess they wanted to know why I didn't go to the Catholic Church school. And then they asked me very aggressively, "What religion are you?" And, I wasn't going to say atheist because I knew it would have been over for me then. So this wasn't the wisest thing to say, but I said, because this is what my parents told me I was. I was an existentialist. Now, they didn't have any idea what the word existentialist meant. I tried to explain it to them, but by that time, they were pummeling me with their fists and pounding me to the ground for what they said was lying, because I obviously must have been Jewish. So that's certainly not something that you can compare with being persecuted or harassed for your religion or race for an entire lifetime, but it was a little taste of it. In any case, I learned a lot about the Jewish culture, and I believe God had a reason for my growing up in a Jewish neighborhood in Jackson Heights, Queens, because many, many years later, as I began to teach Bible prophecy and study Bible prophecy, I was open to the idea, primarily because I saw the idea developed accurately in the Scripture that God has a supernatural plan for the Jewish people, and the Jews did not forfeit their blessing or their right to the promised land through disobedience or immorality or idolatry. In fact, the Jews are the recipients from God in a covenant that God made with Abraham, where God promised to give the physical descendants of Abraham the land of Israel, or the promised land, as an everlasting covenant. Now, everlasting means only one thing. Everlasting, it means without end. And this is important to understand because there's a lot of Christians running around, a considerable percentage. In fact, of the 74% of evangelical churches that don't read or study and forbid the teaching of Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation and so on and so forth, these same churches have little or no knowledge of the role of Israel, both in the past and today. They have no understanding or clue regarding the Abrahamic covenant and God's plan for Israel in the last days, and the fact that when Israel was reformed as a nation miraculously in 1948, that was the fulfillment of what is called God's prophetic super sign. The fact that the Jews were miraculously returned to Israel in the last days is a prophetic super sign. And that began the countdown to the return of Jesus Christ. Now, I remember also later on, as I studied more and more in Bible prophecy and wrote books on Bible prophecy, being exposed to people who had a completely opposite viewpoint, certain segments of Protestant theology, considerable segments of Protestant theology, quite large, and they firmly believe that, along with the Catholic Church believes this also, considerable percentages of Protestant Christians today, along with the Catholic Church, they both share a common belief. They believe that Israel has forfeited its right to the promised land, the land of Israel. And they believe falsely that the Christian Church has replaced Israel. And that's a falsehood. That's a false teaching. It's true that throughout the Old Testament, we see a pattern, and we see that God deals with mankind and the Jews according to different covenants and dispensations. Now, the different covenants apply to Israel and the Jews. So there are many, many cases throughout the Old Testament whenever the Jews were idolatrous, whenever they would worship false gods, and whenever they would disobey the laws of God, the commandments of God, and participate in the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, whenever they would get involved in sexual immorality and burning their children alive and child sacrifices, they were committing hideous violations of the law and commandments of God. And as a consequence, when they began to initially stray, God would always send the prophets to warn them. And then if they continued to ignore the prophets, God would raise up an enemy. And often it would be the pagan nations that worship the false gods that would be raised up by God to be an enemy to Israel and to conquer Israel in its disobedience and to capture the Jews and bring them into captivity and make them slaves. And so they would serve as slaves in foreign nations in captivity for long periods of time until they finally began to repent and turn back their hearts to God and worship the true God of Israel and obey the commandments in the Old Testament. And then God would prosper them again. So there's a whole cycle of this rebellion, blessing, captivity, regathering that goes on in the Old Testament with the Jews. Now, that is an example of the Mosaic covenant, where God clearly will cause an enemy to be raised up to conquer them when they were in their or part of their promised land and bring them into captivity. So they would be driven from the land on a cyclical basis over thousands of years through their disobedience and worship of idols. However, that does not do away with the other one of the other primary covenants, which is the everlasting Abrahamic covenant, where God says that He is giving them the land of Israel as an everlasting covenant, which means everlasting; it's without end. And that specifically applies to the last days, because the Jews, numerous Old Testament prophets predicted the Jews would return to the land of Israel miraculously in the last days. And they would be given back the land of Israel after about 2,000 years of dispersion. As you recall, the Roman general Titus, not that long after Jesus ascended into heaven and told his disciples he was returning at the second coming, Christ prophesied to his disciples that Herod's temple would be destroyed and not one brick would be left on top of another, and the gold and the jewels and stuff in the temple would be burned and looted. And so after Jesus Christ ascended into heaven, a little while later, the Roman general Titus invaded Jerusalem, and they slaughtered the Jews in a bloodbath, burned the temple, tore it down, left not one brick upon another. The gold was burned so hot it ran in little rivers down the streets of Jerusalem. Many Jews were slaughtered, the women were raped, and then finally, when the siege was over, the Jews were driven out of the land, and they were sold into all the four corners of the earth to serve all these foreign nations as slaves, as punishment for their rejection of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So there God kicked them out of the land. But there was also the prophetic promise that in the last days, God would return them miraculously to the land of Israel. And so after 2,000 years of dispersion, miraculously, after the Holocaust, where about 6 or 7 million Jews were killed in the concentration camps by an anti-Semitic, demon-possessed man named Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. The horror of that softened up the world community, and as kind of a way of trying to generate some kind of goodness towards the Jews, they opened up the land of Israel to the Jews, and Rothschild was a part of that. And a lot of people say, well, Rothschild was a part of it, therefore it's an Illuminati conspiracy. That's that's a very stupid understanding of what happened, because God, as we know, will use anybody He wants to accomplish His will. And since Rothschild was one of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world, whether or not Rothschild was a member of the Illuminati, etc., doesn't mean God wouldn't use him, because God continually uses pagans and every other kind of person to accomplish His purposes. So that doesn't negate the legitimacy of the fact that the Jews were returned to the land just because Rothschild was involved. So, the Jews were returned to the land after they suffered horribly during World War II in Nazi Germany, and about 7 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and the ones that survived the concentration camps and others went by ship, and they were given back the land of Israel. Now, there was a big debate about that because a lot of people didn't want to give them the land of Israel. They were going to give them some land in Africa. But God's prophetic word said that in the last days the Jews would be returned to the land. And so the Jews were. And I had a very close friend, General Shimon Aram, one of Israel's greatest generals. And we became friends, I guess 2 decades ago. Since then, he's gone on to be with the Lord. And he was one of Israel's most prominent generals. And so he was there when the Jews were being shipped back to Jerusalem in 1948. And then a great battle broke out between Egypt and other Middle Eastern nations that were trying to prevent the Jews from returning to their land. And General Shimon Aram was there. He was active in that battle, and the Jews won, and they got back the land of Israel and Jerusalem. And there were many other battles. The 1967-day war, Yom Kippur War, and General Shimon Aram was involved in that war. And he was involved in every major war and battle from when Israel first was coming back to the land of Israel. And then he went on to be with the Lord. I guess it was maybe 10 years or 15 years after the 9/11 attack. And I learned a lot of things from him because I spent a lot of time with him. And he also was heavily involved in the efforts of the Jewish military to track down all the Nazi war criminals that had escaped the Nuremberg trials. And there was a considerable number of high-level Nazi war criminals who escaped being sentenced or executed at the Nuremberg trials. And the Jewish army and men like General Shimon Aram, they hunted them down. And he told me a number of stories of very high-level Nazis and how they were tracked down and how they were killed. Because the Jews learned a lesson which Christians, unfortunately, have not learned. And that lesson is the concept of never again. Because the Jews made a fatal mistake, as did the Christians, but the Jews suffered far more than the Christians during Nazi Germany and the rise of Adolf Hitler. And remember the famous statement of the Jewish people as they continually denied the reality of what was happening all around them, as did the Protestants and the Christians, as did the Catholics, as did many of the Germans, but especially the Jews, because they were the primary target of Hitler. Despite the fact that Hitler made speeches in the streets saying exactly what he was going to do and what the Nazis were going to do, despite the fact that Hitler wrote in his book Mein Kampf exactly his plan for the Jews, which was to annihilate them because he believed that they were a genetically inferior race, and Hitler wanted to breed a master race. So the Nazis openly proclaimed early on their goals, and their goals was to put the Jews to death, mass death. But you see, the Jews could not bring themselves to accept reality, so they did what most people do, is they went into a psychological state of denial. The facts were staring them right in the eyes, And they kept saying, in spite of the evidence to the contrary, they kept saying, it can't happen here, it can't happen here. They could not bring themselves to believe that the Nazis and Adolf Hitler had constructed these horrific concentration camps and were torturing, brutalizing, and killing and gassing to death and burning alive millions and millions of Jews. And as the Jews retreated into their ghettos, the ones that weren't in the concentration camps, they heard continual reports and rumors of this activity, but they could not bring themselves to believe it. So they were in a state of denial of reality, which was signified by those famous words, it can't happen here. And it's so tragic to hear the story, because there were many times that the Jews would be lined up. There's this one black and white photograph where you see about 1,000 Jewish businessmen all dressed up with their hats on, their ties, their business suits, and they all think, and they're very optimistic because they all think they're going out to be given jobs. That's why they're all dressed up in their business outfits. And they weren't all dressed up to go to their jobs. They were all dressed up to go to the concentration camps where that very day they were going to be gassed to death and burned to death. That's tragic. And as the Jews, both men and women, were lined up to go into the entrances of the gas chambers and the chambers with the ovens, you couldn't see inside. There was these strong metal doors. As they were lined up until the very point where they actually went through the doorway, they were convinced, for example, the Jews were convinced that they were told they were being given showers by the Nazis, and the Jews were convinced that they were going to be given showers. And so even as they walked into the room, and then they disrobed, and there were shower head-looking things all over the place, and they were expecting to get a much-needed shower. And so they were in a total state of denial right up to the last second. And it was only when they saw that it wasn't steam coming out of the shower heads, but it was poisonous gas, and that they were going to die as they heard people coughing and choking. It finally dawned upon them that they were there to be executed and slaughtered. But they couldn't bring themselves to believe it until the actual so-called shower heads were emitting gas. Okay? And the same way they couldn't bring themselves to believe when they entered the chambers to go into the ovens, their bodies would go into the ovens, they could not believe that usually the bodies were burnt in the ovens. And sometimes they were gassed to death first, and then the bodies were burned in the ovens. But it varied in different ways. But the point is, they couldn't bring themselves to believe how satanic the Nazis were. And so they went into psychological denial, which is something that is not just exclusive to the Jews. All segments of humanity embrace this psychological defense mechanism, which is very dangerous. So in the presence of great danger and great evil and a great threat, it is the nature of man to pretend that the great threat and the great danger doesn't exist. So the psychological propensity for men and women is to believe an illusion about what's going to happen, believe a lie about what's going to happen, because they find the lie and the illusion comforting. And so their subconscious minds deny the reality of what's going to happen. And the Jews, for example, really believed they were going to get showers and taken care of and everything would be fine. Even though there was rumors in the Jewish ghettos, and they could smell the burning bodies in the concentration camps. There was all kinds of rumors and clues that this was going on, but they couldn't bring themselves to believe it. Even early on, when Hitler took over, and there was still a chance to get out of Nazi Germany, most of them wouldn't leave because they believed that they were going to be okay. They were denying reality. And so there was the Great Holocaust. Now, the Jews largely have learned their lesson, at least those that live in Israel, etc. And now they no longer say the words, it can't happen here, which represents a denial of reality. They now say the words, never again, never again. So they've made a mind shift from it can't happen here to never again. And so now they're in a hyper state of vigilance. They have the eye of an eagle looking at reality. They're always on the hunt. They're wide awake, and it's reflected in their military policies. And anytime an enemy tries to destroy Jews or the land of Israel, first of all, they're on the job. They're doing everything they can to stop it from happening. But if it happens, they retaliate instantly to communicate a message to their enemies that if anything happens to us or our people, you will experience payback above and beyond what you did to us. And that is a clear message to their enemies that they will not be trifled with, and it's necessary for their survival. Now, as I'm relating this story to you, the tragedy is, here's the great tragedy. And maybe you don't want to hear this, but I'm going to tell it to you because I'm obligated to tell you the truth. Evangelical Christians in America, Catholics in America, and the other religious people in America are saying what the Jews said in their seminaries, in their churches. Their pastors are saying it from the pulpit. They're saying it to one another. And Christians in America, including evangelical Christians, are in denial of the reality that they are being targeted, and that if the continued persecution continues, that what is going to happen with mathematical certainty is the preaching of the gospel, the practicing of the Christian faith will be designated officially as hate speech, as hate, and there will be mass arrests of Christians, the closing down of Christian churches, and then if there isn't something to interrupt it, because this is the inevitable flow of history, then they send Christians by the millions, Bible-believing Christians by the millions, to camps that they might first call re-education camps, but they're actually concentration camps. And then the next step is always to kill the victims of the concentration camps, in this case, the Christians. This is not some bizarre paranoid theory. This is the way human nature is. Because once you allow the spirit of Antichrist to enter any nation, and the spirit of Antichrist has entered Germany, it entered Russia and China and the other communist nations, and the spirit of Antichrist is now operating in America. And what the spirit of Antichrist does is it continues to breed a rebellion of everything to do with God, the Bible, and Christians. And then, using psychological propaganda through the media, Christians become the target. They become persecuted. They become hated. Then they become arrested. Then they're sent to camps. And then eventually the hatred becomes at such a boiling point that they're killed. And I know a lot of you don't want to hear that. And many of you do, because you're hungry for the truth. But I guarantee you, most of your Christian friends will tune the channel in their brain. They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear the truth any more than the Jews wanted to hear the factual reports of the Holocaust, the killings, the arrests of their fellow Jews. Even though they were told constantly about what was really going on, they continued to preserve that state of psychological denial and continued to utter the words, "It can't happen here, it can't happen here." And they clung on to that mythology right up to the time they went into the door of the gas chambers. Now, it took a Holocaust where somewhere between 7 and 8 million people were killed. About 7 million Jews were killed. And it took that horror to develop a mind shift in the Jews, or at least a great number of the Jews, where they are on the alert and they say, "It can't happen." They no longer say "it can't happen here." They now say, "Never again." But Christians, on the other hand, have had it easy. And so they are denying reality. They're denying all the language that is used against Christians. They think it's just, oh, no big deal, just words. That's how it started in Nazi Germany, by the way. Oh, no big deal, it's just words. That's exactly how it started with Adolf Hitler. It began with words. It began with just words. It began with anti-Semitic jokes. And then it ended in the killing of 7 million Jews being killed in the concentration camps, and 1 million Protestants and others, totaling about 8 million people. So when you hear these little jokes about angry white men, angry Christian white men, that's not just a racial thing against white men and white women. They're also including the Christian religion in there. And there's many mockeries of Christians. If you think the word deplorable is just some intellectual put-down word, you're very wrong. That word deplorable is loaded. It means Christian Americans who believe in God, biblical values. Okay? That's what it means. Wake up. Don't be so stupid, for crying out loud. I'm not speaking to the regular listeners of the Paul McGuire Report. You know what I'm talking about. But your friends are stupid. And you say that's unkind. Is it really unkind for me to say that they're stupid? What is my purpose in saying that they're stupid? Is it to be cruel? No, it's not my intention to be cruel at all. I'm telling you that your friends are stupid. Strategically, methodically, I'm trying to employ a degree of psychological shock so that when you hear me say that, you part of you is offended. Those of you that know me are not offended, but part of you is offended and think what I said is offensive. But no, I didn't say it to offend you. I said it to shock you. Why? Because the Christian church in America is asleep at the wheel. It's asleep at the wheel. And that's the same thing as saying it can't happen here. And so the regular listeners of the Paul McGuire Report, you know what I'm talking about. You already know my heart. But I'm saying you're Christian friends because I have the same Christian type friends that you have. The Christian culture and most Americans are in the dead zone of their mind where they say, it can't happen here. This is all like paranoid conspiracy talk. This is not paranoid conspiracy talk. This is what happens historically. Not with just Nazi Germany. It happened in other nations too. The communist revolutions all produced this. Evil moves incrementally. And it always begins with name-calling, jokes, disparaging remarks. But if you listen carefully, the people that intend to destroy you are saying it out loud. Now, if you want to analyze the language of radical leftist activists, They're saying loud and clear what they plan to do. So we can't afford to go into, you know what, you're supposed to learn the lessons of history. The Jews learned to a large degree the lesson of history. Now they say never again. Christians need to learn the lesson from the Jews and other nations, and we need to say never again. If we're going to go into this mind warp where we say it can't happen here, we are doomed. Now, back to why you may be offended, and I need to explain my motive, which is obviously not to offend you. My motive is to shock you. Why is my motive to shock you? Because I'm trying to do everything I can as one person to move those people you know from a state of mind where they say it can't happen here and transition them towards a state of mind where they say never again. All right? And shock, when you're talking to people who are asleep or in a it's difficult, I haven't said the word in a long time, somnambulistic state. That's like a trance state, like a sleep. That's why God wants a great awakening. That's why the word says, awake, sleep, or rise from the dead, and the light of Christ will shine upon you. When God's people are not experiencing spiritual revival, when they're not walking in a right relationship with Jesus Christ and reading their word, they're in a spiritual state of slumber. The Bible says that repeatedly. So most Christians are in a spiritual state of slumber where they think it can't happen here. And so you have to wake them up. Now, we all know that when people don't want to be woken up and they want to stay asleep, you have to do something on the level of shock to get them to wake up and get on with something. That might be shouting their name while their head's buried on the pillow. And if they don't respond to shouting their name, or it's time to go, or wake up, or it's 7 a.m., or whatever it is, then you might put your arm on their shoulder and rock them, and they still don't wake up. You rock them harder. And you know how it goes. If the person's hungover or just is like completely out of it asleep, then you have to take more drastic measures. And I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not saying dump a bucket of water on people's head, but it's been done a lot to wake people up. So my motive is love. The Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your brothers and sisters in Christ as yourself. Now, if I claim to love my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, and I know for sure that there's danger headed our way quickly, and I say nothing, and I allow them to stay in a state of slumber and sleep, and say it can't happen here, am I loving them? Am I truly loving them before God? No, I'll be judged. As a Bible teacher, I will be judged for my silence and not waking them up, because I will be complicit in whatever tragedy happens, because I did nothing to wake them up. So it's precisely because I love these people, despite the fact that they're asleep, I love them, and I love you, that I am commanded by God to take action. And therefore, I use many techniques to awaken people. You give them the facts, but sometimes you got to shock them to be awake. So that is why I confront, because if somebody's asleep, you have to confront that sleepiness so that they can survive. It's not a game. So my motive is love. And I think it's perfectly justifiable. In fact, I think it's necessary. If you really love people, it's necessary that you would do whatever it takes to wake them up. That's what the whole story is with the watchman on the wall. The watchman was put up on a high tower. His job was to stay awake and look for the enemy advancing against the camp of Israel from the distance. And when he saw, God warned him that he was to stay awake and blow the shofar and trumpet and rouse the people for battle and prepare themselves if he saw the enemy coming. But God said, if you fall asleep on your job and you fail to warn my people that the enemy is coming, God said, I'm going to hold you, the watchman, I'm going to hold the blood of my people on your hands. Now, if you are a faithful watchman and you see the enemy is coming and you've stayed awake and you blow the trumpet, you blow the shofar, and you attempt to awaken my people, but they ignore you and rebel, and then when the enemy comes in, they're slaughtered, I will not hold their blood. I will not hold you accountable for their blood. Their blood shall be on their own hands. But if you're a watchman in a tower and you fall asleep and fail to warn my people, then I will hold their blood on your account. So I'm not, judging individual pastors, but I'm saying there should be a sobriety in their hearts. Because I'll be very honest with you, I hear very, very little warning. I hear very, very little, far and few between, of those that blow the trumpet. And they will be judged because they were all assigned with the job of standing in the watchtower and keeping a lookout for the advance of the enemy. And so when they deny that that's happening, or they make fun of that happening, see, they do worse than not blowing the trumpet. And hear me out here. This is a serious thing. They do worse than not blowing the trumpet when they see the enemy coming in a distance. They actively, many of them, not all of them, they actively wage war on the faithful watchmen and do everything they can to make sure their people cannot hear the warning of the faithful watchman blowing the shofar or the trumpet. They interfere with that by saying things to their people like, oh, don't pay attention to him or her. They're just conspiracy theorists. They're just paranoid. Don't pay any attention to them. It'll never happen. Wow, I wouldn't want to be standing in their shoes. So you have faithful watchmen, in some cases watchwomen, blowing the trumpet, warning the people that the enemy is advancing. And not only do many of these pastors and Christian leaders not blow the trumpet of warning, they're not even looking or out for the enemy advancing. But when the faithful watchman tries to blow the trumpet to rouse the people, these pastors and Christian leaders actively oppose or interrupt the warning by trying to drown out the clear sound of the trumpet of warning and telling their people, that's just those guys are just conspiracy theorists. They're just conspiracy theorists. They're just paranoid. Well, you know what? We all do what we can do for the Lord. But there's a day of reckoning for every one of us. And if the day comes when the worst happens, and the worst is happening incrementally now anyway, by the way, all those men and women who claim to be the ministers of God, who poo-pooed the warning, called us conspiracy theorists and paranoid, God is going to hold the blood of his people on their hands. Make no mistake about it. Now, the real question is, where do I and where do you stand in the matter? Because there's only one of two positions that we can be in. One is we are part of God's faithful remnant, doing everything that we can to blow the trumpet, to inform, educate, so that God's people and God's mission can be accomplished and God's people can be spared. Or we have joined the groups which are actively opposing what those of us who are trying to get God's people to be awake and warn them of the impending danger are trying to do. There's another group trying to undermine us and oppose us by mocking us and making jokes about us in the pulpit and calling us conspiracy theorists and paranoid and stuff. So, what it comes down to, it is the responsibility of every Bible-believing Christian to make a decision. Are you going to be part of the problem or part of the solution? Because there's no middle ground. And if you're not actively a part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And then you need to understand the biblical teaching about your accountability, which is every believer in Jesus Christ will stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account for their lives, what they did and did not do. So that's where we are. And it's imperative. That's why this ministry, the purpose of this ministry, is to spread these messages far and wide to as many people as possible. Because the hour is late. You see, like I said, evil comes upon a nation incrementally. And one way evil is coming upon our nation is through this incremental censorship, through social media, through the internet, through mainstream television. Eventually, they want to target any really biblical Christian message and remove it. Don't think for a minute that's not their end game. So right now we have a door open to defeat that, but we don't know how long that door is open. So we have to be faithful in the moment where God has given us an open window. And that's why at this ministry we're doing everything we can. We're using every avenue of communication to reach people, to educate people, so that they're awake, so that their freedoms can be protected, so that the gospel can be preached, so that they can live in safety. We're doing everything we can. Everything. And all of you who share that burden from the Holy Spirit, you are partnering with us. That means we've joined together as one spiritually in this. You've partnered with us by being intercessory prayer warriors, by distributing the links of this radio program and our other media to individuals who need to hear it, and do an end run around the ever-increasing censorship. That's a way of partnering. And then finally partnering by seeking the Lord and contributing your finances and donations. And that should be done with a recognition of the hour that we're in. Because if we do what God has called us to do, and we do it effectively and aggressively, and we don't play games or play church, we can change the direction of the destiny of America. And you see, even when I say those words, I recognize the minute those words left my mouth and resonated in the air through my vocal cords, in my spirit, I instantly recognized the fact that as soon as I said that, I could hear like voices all over the world trying to negate that message, because tragically there are so many believers who have not rightly divided the Word of God, who have not studied the Word of God, and they make theological judgments and decisions without really knowing their Bibles. And when I say those words, we can change the destiny of America, they say, oh, no, it's the last days. Things have to get worse and worse, which is completely false theology and taken out of context. Completely the opposite of what the Bible teaches from Genesis to Revelation. I hear it all the time. You know what that really is? The flesh, our sinful nature, desires to find false comfort and security in the lies of the evil one. That's what it really is. And the reality is that if you study the Scripture properly and rightly divide the Word of God, there is no room whatsoever for that kind of nonsense. Jesus Christ said emphatically, "Occupy the land until I come." To be salt and light. That's what he said. To do business until I come. And how is that done? How do we occupy the land? What's the purpose of occupying the land? There cannot be a biblical revival. There cannot be a last day's soul harvest. There cannot be souls won to Christ on a mass level. We cannot send out missionaries and influence the world for Jesus Christ if America collapses into an atheist, anti-Christian, totalitarian state. And then you'll hear another completely a complete violation of accurately dividing the Word of God. You'll hear people say, well, the Bible says in the last days things are going to get worse and worse. And I don't see America written in prophecy. Therefore, America is going to either be part of this global government or it'll be blown up by nuclear bombs and stuff. And then they'll say, well, it doesn't say that in the Bible. We're going to be in a tribulation period, and the church is going to be raptured. And those that are left behind, they'll be given a choice to accept the mark of the beast or not. Well, all these things taken out of context and not properly understood create a tapestry and a fake theological excuse to disobey God. And it's exactly what the devil wants. In fact, I believe the devil created that theology so that he could paralyze Christians into saying, it can't happen here, and just lay down and be rolled over. There is nowhere in Bible prophecy where you're allowed to make these leaps of theological logic that make no sense. We don't know when Christ is returning. No man knows the date or the hour. So you can't make these assumptions. It's completely irresponsible. We are to occupy the land until he comes. So that we're to do kingdom business until he comes. We're to win souls until he comes. So that's what we're doing until Jesus Christ comes. And none of us knows when he's going to come. So we're supposed to be busy about our Father's business, period. That's the right attitude. And as far as America not being written in Bible prophecy specifically, well, that may be true, but that doesn't give you the right to make this assumption out of nowhere that as if it was a certainty that, America is going to be blown up by nukes and stuff, and that's why we're not talked about in Bible prophecy. That is a complete conjecture. That's a complete theory, a theory based on very, very flimsy evidence. It's a theory. That's all. It's not the Word of God. And you say, well, then America's going to be part of this one world government and blah, 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 and that's why America's not mentioned. Well, eventually America is going to be part of this one world government. But here's the problem with using that as an excuse for apathy and inaction and disobedience. You don't know, and I don't know, when that is going to happen. And since we don't know when it's going to happen, we can't use that as an excuse to be apathetic. Remember, Christianity is not fatalism. There's many things that are going to happen because Bible prophecy says they're going to happen. And then, if God's people obey the Lord, occupy the land until he comes, do kingdom business until he comes, it's the desire of God to bless his people, to use his people, to protect his people up until the time he comes. And so we're to be busy about our Father's business. Okay, now, By the way, as resources to help you in your understanding of this, once again, I strongly recommend you get a copy of the book Mass Awakening, which talks about how if God's people will passionately seek His face and get involved through the power of the Holy Spirit, we can ignite a mass awakening or a mass great awakening to reach the world for Christ before His return. At the same time, there is going to be an evil mass awakening. And so it may well be there's a clash of awakenings, a satanic awakening battling a godly third great awakening. But may the Lord have mercy on the church in America especially, because to whom much is given, much is expected. May the Lord have mercy on us if we neglect to seek the face of God, if we neglect to cry out to God, if we fail to lay hold of God and ask Him to pour out a mighty third great awakening. May the Lord have mercy on us if the forces of Satanism and the occult and witchcraft and secret societies, may the Lord have mercy on us if they generate a dark satanic mass awakening, because that will come upon the Christian church like a tsunami, destroying millions. If the church is just in the, playing church mode, we will be destroyed, literally. We will be no match for a satanic mass awakening. But if we are able to ignite the fires of revival and a biblical third great awakening, then there will be a opposing force, the force of God, the force of revival, that will more than match and in most cases subdue the satanic mass awakening. Your life, your children's lives, your grandchildren's lives, the future of America and the future of the world depends on it. So you need to get a copy of Mass Awakening because you need to know how these things are generated. You can't walk around like a clueless person, because clueless people are targets for takedown. And then you should get a copy of Trumpocalypse so you understand how important it is to understand properly how God is using Donald Trump despite his imperfections. And then Conquering the Matrix, because the battle that we're fighting is a battle of mind control, sorcery, propaganda, and persuasion. And you can get these resources at paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. By the way, we have an upcoming Paradise Mountain Church meeting very, very soon, and it's going to be posted at paulmcguire.us in the next day or two. So visit paulmcguire.us and spread the word of this program and links to this message to the people that need to hear it. Okay, so Donald Trump is under all-out attack. Most of the things they're saying about him are built on lies. They used the shooting, the horrific shooting in Pittsburgh at a synagogue, and they tried to say that it's Donald Trump's fault because he has raised the level of the language of hate, and he has created hateful speech, and he's generated anti-Semitism, and he's responsible for a lot of the violence and the shootings and the terrorism in our society. It's all Donald Trump's fault. And that message is an organized effort of propaganda built on a lie. It's built on a total lie. And yet notice how the mainstream media, using a classic principle of mind control, which is called repetition, you hear that over and over and over again, and whether it's wrong or right, sooner or later your subconscious believes it to be the truth. That is a completely false statement. And then the statement that Donald Trump used the word nationalism, well, that must mean he's anti-Semitic and he doesn't like Jews. is another propaganda, scientific mind control technique based on total lies. And I want to unmask those lies. First of all, Donald Trump is the first U.S. president in the history of the United States where he has moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, which is the city of David. That's the most holy city on earth, according to the Bible, for both Jews and Gentiles. And he honored God. This was an act of worship towards the living God by recognizing, because what this did is it recognized, it was the first time America officially recognized that the city of David, the city of Jerusalem, was the capital of Israel, and it honored the truth, the biblical truth, that Jerusalem is the city of God. Now that has enormous spiritual ramifications that are in complete alignment with the Bible and Bible prophecy. Because remember, Jerusalem is God's city. The city of God on planet Earth is Jerusalem for Christians and Jews. This is huge. Babylon is the city of man, or the city of Lucifer. Jerusalem, and only Jerusalem, is the city of God. It's the city of David. Notice that it was in Jerusalem where the Messiah, Jesus Christ, came. So many powerful events in the history of Israel took place in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital city in the promised land of Israel that was given to the Jews by God. And finally, Jesus Christ is going to return from heaven as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he will descend upon the city of Jerusalem, which, according to the Bible, says it will become the new capital of planet Earth after Jesus Christ returns. And during the 1,000-year millennial reign of the Lord Jesus Christ on earth, Jesus Christ will rule and reign planet Earth along with his co-regent, King David, from the new capital of planet Earth, which is Jerusalem. So what Trump has done in Jewish theology, in Jewish prophecy, as well as Christian prophecy and Bible prophecy, is one of the most holiest acts a leader can do, and it's an honoring of God at the highest of highest levels. So to say that Trump is fueling extremism and anti-Semitism is an outrageous lie, and they use that as propaganda because most Americans don't know their Bibles. They have no clue as to the eternal importance of the city of Jerusalem, and all Jews that believe their Bible. All Jews that believe their Bible. One thing I learned from General Shimon Aram was that I asked him the question, General Shimon Aram, why is it that so many Jews seem to be persecuting Christians and attacking Christians when these Christians are the very ones that are standing up from Israel? They're standing against anti-Semitism, and they're supporting the nation of Israel. Why is it that so many evangelical Christian groups that are supporting Israel get attacked by so many quarters of the Jewish community? And General Shimon Aram said to me, and these are the words of General Shimon Aram, he said, Paul, there are basically two kinds of Jews in America. There are those conservative Jews who have a conservative political viewpoint, and they very much believe in the Old Testament, the Torah, and the God of Israel, and in the prophetic truths of the Bible, like that the Messiah will return to Israel. And he said they are not given much mainstream media attention because the mainstream media only wants to focus in on the other kind of Jews. Now, this is General Shimon Aram's words, not mine. The other kind of Jews, which don't seem to believe in the God of Israel. In many cases, they're atheists. They don't believe in the importance prophetically of the nation of Israel. They don't believe that God planned prophetically to return the Jews to the land of Israel after 2,000 years. He said but he says those are the Jews that will get all the television time and that the media will pay attention to. But he said there's really a larger group of Jews that are ignored by the media, who are conservative politically and who stand by and stand with the evangelical Christians. That was very enlightening. So, who is Trump being attacked by? He's not being attacked by the larger group of Jews who are conservative politically and believe in the biblical importance of Israel and that Jerusalem will be the capital of planet Earth and believe in the God of Israel. Those are not the Jews that are attacking him. The Jews that are attacking him are what General Shimon communicated with me, and he described them as secular Jews, that they call themselves Jews, but they're atheists and socialists and humanists, and they don't believe in most of the Bible. They don't follow the Bible. They don't really obey the commandments of the God of Israel. And he said those are the ones that are constantly attacking Christians. And if he was alive today, I know, because I spent so much time with him, he'd say that's the segment of the Jewish community that is attacking Trump. And that's an important thing. The media will never tell you that. And the reason for that is the media is totally owned and controlled by the globalist elite. The globalist elite wants to see the destruction of the United States of America and merge America into a global, secularist, socialist government where true Christianity is outlawed and true Judaism is outlawed. That's the truth. So the reality is Trump did more to recognize the nation of Israel than any president before him. All the rest had no real intention of making Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the true capital of Israel. They had no intention. They were just faking it, both Democrats and Republicans. So it was only Donald Trump who had the guts to visibly demonstrate his complete support for the Jewish people. And then, on top of it, Trump's daughter, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is a very devout Jew and supporter of the land of Israel. His daughter, who married Jared Kushner, has converted to Judaism, and all their children have become Jewish. So how on earth can you rationally and honestly call a man who has made outrageous supports for the nation of Israel, whose daughter marries a devout Jew, Jared Kushner, then she herself converts to Judaism, and their children have become Jewish? How can you dare lie and call this man anti-Semitic and imply falsely, which is also a lie, that just because he used the word nationalist that he's some kind of anti-Semitic Nazi. Those are all lies. That's what propaganda is. You manipulate facts, you distort facts to perpetuate a lie. Now, let's look at the words that Trump meant. Let's look at what Donald Trump meant when he said the word he's a nationalist. First of all, I have to say, in the larger scope of things, again, given the climate of Orwellian thought police and disinformation by the mainstream media, by radical activists, Hollywood celebrities, etc., who are constantly surveying every little word that Trump says and pulling it out of context and distorting its meaning in order to perpetuate a lie. All, by the way, collectively, these actions of lying, these actions of propaganda, these actions of lying about Trump, the mainstream media and the radical activists and Democrats are saying it's Trump that's responsible for the climate of hate and for raising this ugly tone. Well, that's utter nonsense. The people that are primarily responsible for this ugly tone in American discourse and for the violence and the shooting and the anger and the rage are specifically the mainstream media, the radical activists who are implementing their age-old strategy, which is order out of chaos or manufactured crisis. They're trying to stir up as much anger as possible because that's order out of chaos. And so, and they lie, for crying out loud. They lie brutally because it's a fact that Trump is not anti-Semitic. Now, but given the fact that this lying machine, this Orwellian machine, is constantly in operation, funded by billionaire globalists, funded by radical groups, funded by the United Nations, funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars where the U.S. taxpayers don't understand that our State Department has secretly been funding your taxpayer money into the United Nations, and that the United Nations has been the primary financier of this migration caravan coming from Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico. That whole upheaval, all those trucks, all the organizational structure, all the lawyers, all these people that it's like a military operation. They put women with babies first and children first, so any opposition towards that is looked at as cruelty. And that's just a military strategy, because behind the women with the babies and the children are, the majority of these people coming in are military-age males. Okay? So this invasion is being funded and planned and coordinated by the United Nations and a certain disturbing segment of our State Department, which is, it's taking your tax dollars, giving it to the UN, and then the UN is financing, not with their money, with American taxpayer money, this massive operation with the caravan. Now, all of these actions, the constant stirring up, the constant attacks of Trump by the late-night comedians, the unending assault, the violent assaults on Trump, this all began with the left. It all began with the radical Democrats. It all began with the Hollywood celebrities and the mainstream media. I mean, when that comedian girl showed a face mask of Trump being beheaded with blood dripping from his head on national television, that was an ultra-violent act. It put Donald Trump's kid into shock. That was to see a lifelike head of Donald Trump being decapitated with blood all over it. That is an act of violence. That sows violence into the national. Kathy Gifford. That sows sows violence into the national consciousness. And then when early on in his presidency, they in a play in Central Park that the national media made sure they televised, Donald Trump is shot to death and assassinated in a pool of blood. That is pictorial, visual violence. That depicted the murder, the bloody murder of the President of the United States of America, and it was televised into every American home via television. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There has been image after image that has been violent, vulgar, crude. Its only purpose is to generate hostility, rage, anger, constant bombardment by the mainstream media showing violent depictions of Trump. Hillary Clinton calling Trump supporters deplorables. That's an act of violence. That's an act of violence. It's stirring up violence. And all these radical groups that are organized by the billionaire leftists and social media, etc., acts of violence, just bombarding our hearts and minds. And so it is completely false. It's a total lie, a total and complete lie that Donald Trump has turned the tone of national discussion violent, and it's because of his words that these shooters are going berserk. That is a total lie, a deep lie. And that's what propaganda is. But if you repeat it to the American people over and over again, they'll believe it. Donald Trump did not create this climate of violence. The mainstream media, the radical activists, the billionaires financing it, certain politicians, sadly to say, of the Democratic Party, they were calling for his impeachment. They openly, I'm not saying Democratic politicians, I'm talking about certain radical activists and stuff, called for taking Trump out by any means necessary. So some famous people said they'd shoot him and kill him. So what are you talking about? It is an utter and complete lie, a distortion of the facts to even remotely suggest that Donald Trump created this climate or this tone of violence. That is a lie. That's a falsehood. This total climate of violence was conceived, designed, generated, and implemented by the mainstream media, the radical activists funded by super billionaires, certain members of the Republican Party, and their co-conspirators. They are the ones that began the climate of violence and anger. This goes back to the deliberate, strategic attempt to stir up racial wars in cities across the U.S. when President Obama was president. There was a deliberate effort to stir up race wars. Yes, there was. To exploit the tension between the police and African Americans. That was pushing. See, what they do is they push the levers on the right and the left to create violence. This whole caravan thing is designed to erupt into violence. So, who's responsible for the violence? It's not Donald Trump. And let's examine the word nationalism in just a minute. It's so important for people to hear the truth. And you cannot hear the truth on mainstream media. And I hate to break your hearts, but even the so-called moderate, pseudo-conservative cable news network is sliding ever so quickly into becoming almost a liberal moderate network. And they only tell you a tiny part of the truth. The amount of true and important and relevant information that they omit from their programs is the big lie. It's not so much what they say on air, it's what they choose not to cover. And so, people in America that are not tuned into alternative media and places where they can get the truth are being subjected to scientific mind control, brainwashing, and propaganda. That's what is happening. And the only thing that will stop it is to educate people, speak the truth, and communicate the truth as widely and fastly as possible. And that begins with spiritual truth in the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it also involves truth in every area of life. That's why I need you to stand with me with your intercessory prayers, the sending of links to people to get around the censorship in the internet, and to seek the Lord as to what you should contribute financially and through your donations. We are in the greatest battle for the heart and soul of mankind and America that we've ever been in. And if we do not respond to the challenge with an aggressive spiritual counterattack using spiritual weapons, we are going to lose our nation, we're going to lose our freedoms, and there will be great suffering. And this will move across the world. Make no mistake about it. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We have all kinds of free information for you. An upcoming church meeting very soon. Get yourself a copy of Conquering the Matrix, Mass Awakening, and Trumpocalypse. And most of all, ask yourself the question every day, am I part of the problem or part of the solution? If you're doing nothing, you don't even ask yourself the question. If you're doing nothing but laying low and disconnected, you don't have to answer the question. I'll answer it for you. You're part of the problem. You are the problem. Fortunately, in God's goodness, you can change that at any moment by repenting, asking Jesus to forgive you of your sin, and become part of the solution. And as for your Christian friends, I have Christian friends too. Most of them, and I don't enjoy saying this because they're my friends, but most of them are clueless and out to lunch. They are not really, I'm not saying they're not aware to varying degrees of what's happening. I'm not saying that they don't sympathize with the kinds of things that I'm suggesting. But there's no commitment from them. There's no fire in their belly. They're not acting like they should. They should be acting like what the truth demands that they act like. They should be acting like everything they do matters. And there won't be a nation and a life worth living if they don't get involved 100%. They should be acting like people whose house is burning down and they're totally mobilized and focused into putting out the fire and saving lives. No, I'm sorry. I hate to say this. These are people that I know. Church elders, ministers, all over the place. I hate to tell you this because it really breaks my heart. I don't like saying this. But they have this subtle, I don't even know if they're aware of it. It's a subtle la-di-da attitude. It's not an egregious la-di-da attitude. Okay? They are concerned. They do pray. But they're on cruise control. And let me tell you something. Why do you think I do this, for crying out loud? I could play it safe. I could lay low. I have nothing to gain from this but risk and danger. My conscience demands that I participate, and the Lord has called me, and I'm not going to, and the Lord calls a lot of people, it's not just me. I have to respond to his call. I can't have the blood of the hands of God's people on my hands. I refuse to do that. I cannot be look, I'm an imperfect person just like you, okay? I'm no better than any of you. But for crying out loud, I cannot be in a watchtower looking at the enemy coming against the camp of the children of Israel or the camp of the people of God with with their eyes lusting to destroy us, I can't ignore it and fail to blow the shofar and trumpet as I have been commanded. If I was to disobey God, not even to mention the fact that I will be held accountable by God, and He will literally hold me accountable for the blood of His people on my hands, not even to mention that, before that even comes, I would go insane with guilt. I would be tortured with guilt. I don't understand people, okay? I'm speaking to you from the bottom of my heart. I don't understand why how these people can put their head on the pillow at night and feel no conviction. I wake up constantly. I am tortured by this, okay? Because for crying out loud, God, it's appointed once for a man or a woman to live, and then there's the judgment. We're sojourners. We're just passing through this life. We all have assignments from God. You don't have to be perfect or some super saint to fulfill your assignments. But I cannot ignore evil and fail to blow the shofar. I can't do it. But I can't also do it unless I have partners who share that same fire of conviction, who have fire in their belly, who share with me the burden of what we must do to stop evil and preach the gospel. I cannot do it alone. I'm just one person. But I can do it. I don't need a large... I don't want to be. I could have done this a long time ago. I could have mainstreamed my message, talk about sweet nothings, slap a few Bible verses on it, and I'd have a massive audience. Millions would be rolling through. I'd be living in a mansion. I couldn't do that, man. And then there's degrees of selling out. I couldn't do that. You know why I couldn't do that? Because if I had that mansion, and if I had this millions and millions of dollars of money coming in through this ministry, and all that stuff, and I knew in my heart that the way I got it is because I decided to water down the truth. I couldn't live with myself. That so-called mansion that I would be living in would be a very expensive casket. Every time I would walk in the mansion, which was paid for by me selling out, it would be like laying down in the most expensive casket and burial plot. I can't do it, folks. Can't do it. Can't do it. Won't do it. Will never do it. I will never do it. But the battle is raging. We can turn the tide of the battle. If we act as one, function as one, and if every one of us will do our parts, we can. Listen to me. It just takes a dedicated minority. We can change the direction of America and preach the gospel. So that's why I ask you to pray like an intercessory prayer warrior for me, the ministry, and my family. Send the links out so we can do an end run around the censors and get these programs out. And then, just pretend. No, I don't even want to come close to manipulating you. I wasn't even intending to manipulate you with what I was just about to say. But since it could have been construed as manipulation, I won't even say it. All I'll say is this: go to the Lord, ask Him, seek His face, and whatever He tells you to do in terms of financial donations and contributions, do it. Because let me tell you something, and this part is not manipulation. This is the truth. We either win this thing, or there will be nothing worth living in. All right? So visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Now, the lying machine. Given the lying machine, I think it was unfortunate that Donald Trump used called himself a nationalist. I know what he meant by that. He meant it in the way that he believes in the independent nation state, and therefore he believes in America first. That's what he means by nationalism. Versus globalism, which is not this altruistic thing that they're lying about and saying it's a good thing. Globalism is a secret plot by the globalist elite and their occult secret societies to rule and dominate the world under a global system, which they will be on the top of the hierarchy, getting all the wealth and power, and the rest of mankind will toil as their slaves. Okay? That's what globalism is. It's the biggest con game ever invented in the history of humanity, and it was invented by Satan, and it was first implemented at the Tower of Babel during the time of ancient Babylon, because ancient Babylon at the Tower of Babel was the first globalist state, and it was Luciferian, and it incorporated the Pharaoh God-King system. It knew how to use sorcery and the occult to enslave the masses, and then ancient Egypt basically used that as their model. And that's why you have the Pharaoh God-King system, which I talk about in Conquering the Matrix and Mass Awakening. And that is designed to enslave the masses because you convince the masses you're God-Kings. And so that's why slaves, everywhere you see these globalist empires, the occult secret society empires, in every single case, including now, you see slaves. It's designed to enslave man. It's a Luciferian plot. And so Trump, I don't know what he knows about the theology or the spirituality of globalism, but he knows about the economics of it. Globalism is just a top-down scheme, a centralized method of control. It will lower people's standard of living. It will take away your freedoms. It will create a nightmare for people to live in. That's what globalism will do. And so Trump said he was a nationalist to simply say, I believe in the independent sovereign nation state. And by the way, if you read Genesis 31, that's exactly what God says. God comes out and says he believes in nationalism in Genesis 31. Okay, so what they did, the lying media, the Orwellian media, and all the other people, the professional liars, twisted what he meant. And Jewish people are especially sensitive to this, and rightfully so, because they were victims of the Holocaust. And the man who initiated the Holocaust, the head of Nazi Germany, was Adolf Hitler, who called himself a nationalist. But he didn't mean it in the same way Trump meant it. And in truth, Adolf Hitler was not just a nationalist. The proper description of Adolf Hitler was one he gave to himself and his Nazi party. Adolf Hitler was not a nationalist. Adolf Hitler was a national socialist. He was a socialist. Adolf Hitler embraced the same socialism as communism, but it had some slight modifications. That's why it was called National Socialism. The National Socialist Party is the party that put Adolf Hitler into power. But for Jews who were scarred horrifically through this, any mention of the word national or nationalist, even though those Jews who understand that in reality Hitler was a National Socialist, just the mention of the word nationalist touches very deep, hot buttons of pain. So it wasn't the wisest thing for him to say. Having said that, he is in no way a nationalist, because what they're trying to imply is that he's like a Nazi. He's not a Nazi. He believes in the same kind of nationalism that George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin believed in. Not a Nazi. See, that the Nazi stuff is a way they're lying about him. They're trying to make him this this fear monger, this hate monger. That's not who he is. He was never that way. He was never that way. They created, see, propaganda is all about creating lies that will stick on your enemies. Propaganda is all about using lies to control people. And so the people who, I just want to cover this briefly. I mean, what has Black Lives Matter said about white people? What have these radical groups, and I don't even want to get into this racial game, but there are all kinds of radical groups in America on the left, in Hollywood, in the mainstream media, who have sown the seeds of hate, violence, racism, anger, hostility, and everything else. They have sowed the climate of fear and hatred, not Donald Trump, because they are the ones that are distorting the words of Donald Trump to make him sound like he's some kind of Nazi. And what does that do? It stirs up even further hatred. They are the authors of the hatred. They're the ones, because the elite know that if they can divide and conquer America, they can control America. Now, there's only one. The average American is in a trance. They're brainwashed. I tried to explain this concept to a number of millennials, and they have no idea that Hitler was a National Socialist. They have no idea about anything because they were deliberately deprived of the information. So we have to educate people and communicate the truth. We have to be healing agents. And one thing that we need to do in our own culture, and I'm speaking about the Christian culture, we need to be very careful. I'm not talking about compromising the truth. Don't misunderstand me. But we have to be very careful about the language we use, and we have to be very cognizant about how the language we use, which may be legitimate language, okay, but if we use certain words or certain descriptions, if we improperly use language, images, symbols, statements, even if we're slightly off, you know what happens? We open the door for the enemy to come in and lie about what our message means and distort what our message means. And again, I am not calling for watering down the truth. But we must remember, we are to speak the truth in love. That's where our power comes from. And we must be intelligent enough that before we say things, we need to calculate methodically and anticipate, gee, what kind of reaction is this going to cause in the general public? And if we're saying a word that could be easily misunderstood, even though the motive in our heart is right, we're going to open the door for unnecessary attacks and confusion by our spiritual enemies. So we have to speak like ambassadors of the kingdom of God. We have to be very careful with our words. We have to always make sure we're speaking the truth in love. How many times do I hear Christians speak the truth, but there's no love there? All that does is create animosity towards Christians. And then finally, above anything, we have to really listen to what the culture is saying so that we can understand how to communicate to them. And the key word is precision. We must be precise with our words. If we're not precise, we're going to open up the door for unnecessary attacks. We need to use precision. The Word of God tells us that we're to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. That means we need to understand the reality of the strategy of the evil one, but we need to have wisdom of the techniques of our adversary, but at the same time, speak the truth in love. But God didn't say, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. God did say, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So we're to have the wisdom of the serpent. We don't have that problem in the Christian community. This is what we have in the Christian community. We're wise as doves, which doves are not particularly intelligent. We're wise as doves and harmless as serpents, meaning because of our stupidity and empty-headedness, we actually invite the attacks of the serpent. We need to turn that around immediately. Okay? We need to, when we can, collectively turn that around immediately. We simply agree among ourselves and we spread it far and wide virally on the media and say, the days of the dumb Christian are over. We can do that. We make a choice. Because there's this attitude in the Christian culture that it's okay to be dumb. It's okay to be anti-intellectual. No, it's not okay to be dumb. And it's not okay to be anti-intellectual. God gave every one of his people, every single one of you, and every person you know that's a Christian, God gave a super intelligence IQ to. But if you're not going to use the brain power God gave you, then you are going to be a dummy. So being a dummy is not a matter of DNA, it's a matter of choice. Let's choose to be wise. Let's choose to have knowledge, because that brings power. Let's choose to have vision, because when we have vision, we won't perish. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.